Welcome to the Humans of Hospitality podcast with me, Mark Cribb. Now another week and something is clearly in the air with more and more restaurants or hospitality venues trying to reopen in some sort of guise. Maybe it's the frustration of sitting idle, maybe it's the recognition that the industry is very broken and some sort of pivot for survival is going to be essential for those businesses that can do so, and many unfortunately cannot. I saw Mitch Tonks is doing some great things with local suppliers, providing an opportunity for his customers to buy direct from the fishing boats or asparagus from the farmers and collecting them from outside his restaurant in Brixham. Another lovely sign of the food supply community looking after each other and helping each other out. On a personal level, I've also opened my town's first drive-thru restaurant using my hotel parking bays as a collection point every 10 minutes for completely contactless order, payment and collection. And whilst I only took about 7% of a normal spring Saturday's trade, so it's certainly not a viable business model, it was very exciting to see the kitchens open and a few excited and loyal customers waving from their car windows with big smiles on their faces. Humbling as ever to get their support. And talking of humbling, one lovely customer even got in touch to offer to lend me £5,000 to help keep the restaurants open with no interest and no particular repayment date in mind. Another great indication of just how much love and support is out there for local community venues. On a national level, the industry continues to fight through Hospitality Union, continuing to campaign most importantly for the national timeout to see a 9-month rent-free period for the industry. If you've not signed up already, head over to hospitalityunion.co.uk and pop in your details to join over 2,500 other venues to back that campaign, along with a cut in VAT, raising of the 51k rateable value cut-off for grants and a staggered extension to the furlough scheme. Now, as Sunday approaches, we wait nervously for the government's plan to release lockdown. I don't think there is too much optimism of what that will look like for bars and restaurants, but for one, I hope venues with outside terraces might be able to trade in some guise in June. There was a study released in China demonstrating that only 2 people had caught the virus outside, and most contagious was the home or public transport. Al fresco dining may be the only option this summer. We've had some stunning weather, so I suppose it will probably pour it down with rain from the moment we are all released. Right, on to today's chat where I am catching up with Andrew Stephen from the Sustainable Restaurant Association. I've seen a number of posts from the SRA offering practical support, not only for members, but for anyone hitting their website. And whilst much of that is really useful and detailed, I particularly enjoyed chewing the fat with Andrew on some of the sustainable opportunities that would be foolish to waste as we look at what our industry could look like moving forwards. As we inevitably reduce our menus to simplify production, both to have fewer chefs in the kitchen for distancing purposes, but also to reduce costs and waste, is now the chance more than ever to look at buying local, purchasing from people rather than brands, and caring about the impact of what we purchase on the land and the environment. I certainly hope so, and Andrew is well placed to talk about what this could look like. Could government support even be tailored and focused to offer additional support to those doing the right thing and trading more ethically in the food and drink space? Complicated, but a great concept. And remember, if you can support the podcast via the tip jar at humansofhospitality.co.uk/donate, you could become a patron via the Patreon platform, and that would be exceptionally helpful and appreciated. With no businesses left personally to help finance this podcast, I would really appreciate your support. Thank you so much, and please enjoy today's conversation. Andrew Stephen from the Sustainable Restaurant Association, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Hugely appreciated. Before we get going, can I just check, are you at home and are you and your family all well?
At home, all well, if not mind-numbingly bored.
Okay, yeah. It's tricky. Have you pretty much been based at home the whole time, or have you been able to go into the office at all?
No, I did one kind of post/technology run to the office in late March. The team, there's 20 of us, and we started working from home in the second week in March, I think.
Oh, wow. Okay.
A bit earlier. We were in a shared office, and there was already quite a lot of jitters about, I guess the difficulty in sort of controlling and cleaning and isolating and things like that. So we took the decision to work from home then.
Excellent. All right. Well, you spotted it early. We'll come to that. So for people that don't know you, can you just explain a little bit what is the Sustainable Restaurant Association and what's your role there, please, Andrew?
Sure, yeah. So the Sustainable Restaurant Association is a social enterprise and not-for-profit membership organisation. And we exist to help decision makers in hospitality to make good environmental and social decisions. We do that through offering a membership product that people pay for or used to pay for kind of on a monthly or annual basis. And that gives them access to lots of tools, ideas, resources, an audit and each other so that we can kind of work together to try and work through some of the complex kind of environmental and social issues that come with running a restaurant.
Amazing. And when you say used to pay for, does that mean you're amongst the many direct debits that have been cancelled from restaurants? Or
again, we jumped a bit early on that. So yeah, I guess it felt particularly pointless to be chasing restaurants for subscription cash for our services when they're not trading. So we've given every member a payment holiday of 3 months, and we'll keep that under review as we go forward. It's our aim that we would support our members to kind of reopen right, as it were, and then we'll hopefully kick back on with membership or something very close to it when people are trading again in volume.
Amazing. Yeah, it's nice that you're demonstrating, I suppose, well, not even how it should be, almost how it needs to be, I suppose, for the sector. That must have financial implications on the SRA, though. Have you got some reserves to get through that period, have you?
I mean, we're not like Scrooge McDuck, like frolicking in a vault of cash. But we did manage to bring forward some grant funding, and we have taken advantage of the furlough scheme. So yes, we have got kind of operating capital to run for the foreseeable.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, our business is mainly membership revenue, and we also run some sort of project work, and we get grant funding for certain bits and pieces of what we do, and some of that's been a bit more resilient, some of the kind of more researchy stuff. So the reduced team, are sort of continuing on with that stuff.
Okay, that's good. And when this sort of started to unfold, before we talk about sort of impact in the industry and the stuff you've been involved on, specifically, I guess, the impact on the SRA, but how did this come about? You mentioned earlier when we were chatting that you actually moved out to your home office fairly early in mid-March. Can you just talk about, what your observations of what was coming across from China and what made those decisions happen quite early?
It's really difficult to remember what we were thinking and doing in mid-March, isn't it? I don't know if anyone else.
It is, absolutely.
I think that I don't think we were particularly prescient. I think we were in central London, and a lot of the team were commuting across London every day. It was in that sort of growing paranoid period where coughs and splutters were, covered with farts rather than the other way around. And I think there were some other businesses in our office that we share that were sort of making their own decisions and sending communications around, and we just took that call really. I think in terms of what we saw coming, I think at the time we, to be quite honest, thought that it would be maybe a couple of weeks, and then there's been this sort of overlapping wave of realization that it's going to be a bit longer. But certainly when we first all started working from home, we did it as a sort of 2-week trial to see how we got on. And that was sort of 6 weeks ago.
Right. And operationally, has that been reasonably effective? Are you using video meetings and stuff like that, and it's working okay?
Yeah, I guess on a level, yes. I think quite a lot of the stuff that we used to do with members was about face-to-face. So whether that's our kind of training days or events program, pub quizzes, meetups, awards. So all of that's a lot more challenging. We've been running webinars, but they're never quite as interactive. We certainly don't feel like we get as much back from running those as in terms of learning and helping us get kind of better in our advice. But I guess internally the team dynamic is working pretty well. say of the 20 of us that are on payroll, there's only 5 that are not furloughed at the moment. So in some ways, it's a sort of simpler job to work out what everyone should do each day.
Right. And one of the things you've been doing in that time period is collating, I guess, the thoughts on the industry. I've seen you send out some surveys. What sort of research have you been doing, and what's the, I suppose, the conclusion of that? What sort of information have you ascertained?
Well, I think it's been a bit dyspraxic. Probably, I should carry the can for that fundamentally, that it feels like a really weird time to be trying to do strategy and planning. I think that depending on new bits of news that get released week on week, it feels like we are sort of flitting about a bit in terms of what impact that might have on us. I guess what I kind of come to realise, I think, is that we're essentially trying to do quite a lot of different things to support the industry at quite a lot of different layers of thought, if you like. So there's a set of stuff around kind of managerial support, if you like, about reaching new customers and managing cash flow and thinking about simplifying menu and changing suppliers. And it's felt like, knowing how much our members are struggling and surveying them and seeing that kind of over half are not confident that they're going to survive if they can't reopen before August. It feels churlish to only be talking about the long term. So, we've been really kind of trying to dive in on some of the kind of managerial stuff, operational things that are going to have a direct impact on cash flow. So we were helping members work out how to, access the furlough scheme and stuff like that right in the first few weeks. I guess the next layer from that, and as we kind of kicked into kind of late April and May, we've been thinking a bit more entrepreneurially, I guess, about revenue diversification and some of the different things that members can do. So we've run webinars and guidance on moving to delivery and different ways of doing that, looking at kind of veg box schemes or recipe kits, meal kits. We've got a tool that's freely available for people to use, whether they're members or not, that helps you kind of model the likely income and break even from different alternative business models that you might be considering. So I guess any support we can give on that kind of entrepreneurial bit. And I think from a sustainability perspective, we do see a sort of glimmer of opportunity there that, if people are already reviewing their supply chain, reviewing their menu, if we get in from the ground up a slightly different set of assumptions about how much is spent on the food and what other costs are incurred, we might be able to, I guess, do better than go back to normal in terms of some of the environmental outcomes from those revenue streams. And then I guess the third sort of layer is sort of the real long-term stuff. And, will consumers turn into food citizens, and how, might our view of what we mean by sustainable change? And I guess how does an industry that's going to be receiving a few billion of public funding respond to the need to potentially define its public benefit more clearly? So I think the work we've been doing kind of flits about a bit between those three things. But I guess what we're trying to do over the next couple of weeks and months is help the industry to reopen right in ways that combine all three, that contain the detail of what you need to do on a managerial perspective, some of the ideas and avoiding bear traps on the entrepreneurial side, but are connected up to a sort of more stable vision of, I guess, the public benefit of the businesses that you're running or working in.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that feels like a very sort of chronological approach and probably represents, I guess, most of our experiences as operators, which initially was the technicalities of shutdown and furloughing and, like you say, the business admin, I suppose, moving in now to, oh my God, how do we actually generate some cash? And then, yeah, absolutely, the longer term, what's that going to look like? On the basis that we've probably been through most of the administrative stuff now, most people have probably got that done. On the business diversification, a lot of businesses seem to jump on the, turning the restaurant into a shop or a veg box or a delivery. Have you had any kind of experience as to whether that feels sustainable and are people just doing it because they've got to do something, because I don't think it can sort of compensate for the drop in revenue in a restaurant, I guess. But have you seen any good examples of people doing it, and is it working, or is it just keeping people from going crazy sat at home, do you think?
I mean, there's certainly a good amount of the latter in there. I think Andre Lussman, one of our kind of dearest friends and members, talked about moving to delivery of meals at home as a way of sort of keeping the light on and also paying staff until he got the furlough money. So there's an important kind of symbolic quality, I guess, to sort of not pulling the shutters up completely. I think in truth, whilst we ask our members for lots of information about sustainability in terms of environmental and social outcomes, we're not in the, I guess, pattern of asking for P&L data. We don't API to their Xero or other finance accounts. So I can only really give you anecdotes. I think people that are doing well are maybe getting up towards 20%, 25% of their pre-corona times turnover through those methods. So I don't think there's anyone that we know of that is kind of fundamentally rebuilding their business enough to cover the cost base. But, in a way, that's kind of the wrong framing, if you like. I think as we think about, the next kind of 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, I think it's likely that we go through a series of more intense and less intense lockdowns as opposed to a sort of return to normal imminently. And it's likely that any existing restaurant business model is kind of incompatible with that new world until the end of 2021. So it might not mean that delivery or meal kits on its own is going to be able to cover all of the costs. But I think that there are some other, kind of managerial stuff you can put in place around, I guess, cost reduction.
Yeah, agreed. I think, we're going to need to be a much more diverse and, I suppose, reactive. I mean, luckily we are full of creative people, I guess, who can come up with interesting and creative ways to respond. But it's going to be challenging with
like yourself, the Drivethru restaurant that you've been telling me about.
Yeah. We launched that last week. Yeah, it's literally we only one of our venues has got a car park with sort of easy access to the inside, so we decided to set that one up as a drive-through with just 6 bays, so people completely contactless. They could order, pay and collect. They pull into a car parking bay at an allotted time, lift up the boot, food goes in the boot, and they drive off in sort of 60 seconds. And I guess the absolute primary motivation was just to be seen, to be doing something with the community. And I guess so many people had sort of told us, and I'm sure this is reflective across the whole industry nationally, is all of customers are going, "Oh, do delivery." And it's a really tricky model. We tried it before with a couple of scooters and a car on the road, and it's just very inefficient. If you've got hundreds of people in your restaurant ordering, and you can take multiple orders at the same time and take it 20 feet to a table, is completely different to sticking it on the back of a motorbike and driving your dinner 45 minutes across town and back. It's just such an inefficient model. So I sympathize for anybody that's having to learn now. I feel quite lucky that we learned the complexities of delivery a couple of years ago, and we haven't thrown too much money at it now, because the challenge for people trying to do it now is, with £0 revenue coming in, you've got zero money to play with. And the complexities of furloughing and not being allowed to use your team to do any revenue generating work, I think is really difficult, because, even for us, you just want to try something maybe on a Saturday night for 4 hours. But the complexity is you're not allowed to use your team to do that.
Yeah.
Have you had any kind of conversations? I know you're also representing the industry with government, but have you been involved at all in any furlough conversations? And is that coming up around this sort of transition, I suppose, about this sort of simplicity of it's either off or on, doesn't feel like a sustainable sort of approach with that, I guess?
Yeah, I guess there are lots of modifications that people are looking to make to the existing furlough regulations, other than, kind of acknowledging that they've been an amazing lifeline that we're used to kind of bashing government. But for once, they managed to pull off something relatively efficient. I think within 5 days of filling in the form online, we got the money in our bank. I guess the main piece of work we've been doing in our outreach and lobbying around furlough is about a sort of progressive relaxation of it. So this sort of fear of a bit of a cliff edge that might come at the end of June. And we were very heartened to see Rishi Sunak yesterday announcing that there won't be a cliff edge, although we kind of await more details on that. So whether it's about a progressive ratcheting down of the percentage, or whether it's something more akin to kind of a turnover-based rebate, we think there's some kind of interesting options there. I guess, going into this slightly more, stargazy middle distance, we think that, as real and painful and devastating as this shock has been to lots of particularly independent operators, it's important to kind of balance government subsidy with public benefit. And I think that, not all restaurants are equal. And I guess as difficult as it is to say out loud, we'd support a kind of channeling of continued government support to be progressive rather than ubiquitous, and to proportionally benefit those businesses that are creating public benefit more and for longer. So, that might be a bit self-serving, but I guess businesses that are addressing the climate emergency, businesses that are supporting UK agricultural transition through their procurement, businesses that are basically providing healthy, sustainable diets, promoting biodiversity, and leaving people and communities in a better place than they found them, we think deserve more. And we think they're more worth protecting. So that's been our push to government, and that's what we're going to try and pull through to create, I guess, a bit more intrinsic incentive for people to do what we consider the right thing.
Yeah, that would be incredible if you could pull that off. And there does seem to be this sort of community swelling of people who want the world post-pandemic to be different to the world sort of pre-pandemic, I guess, and less about huge, giant global corporations, exploiting the reserves of the planet. But is that realistic? Because it must be really difficult. I'm thinking in Rishi's shoes, the complexity of trying to manage the economy and some of the bigger players that probably employ a lot of people but fundamentally sell maybe crap food and get people fat and sell booze, compared to maybe some of your members who do it for the right reasons. I would love it if that could actually be the case, that the support was more focused. But do you think that's realistic?
I don't know. I think it's worth trying. And I think even a bit of signalling on that might also help some of the, I guess, kind of diner-facing follow-ups we're going to be doing. Ultimately, you can't create a kind of government subsidy lever towards a completely sustainable restaurant sector on its own. But I think it strikes us as an opportune time to be having that conversation, and we'll kind of see where it goes. I think you're right that, people are, being surveyed. I think, was it Food Foundation said that only 9% of people in their survey want things to go, quote unquote, back to normal. Bit poetic, but I don't know if you caught kind of Arundhati Roy's piece in the Financial Times a couple of weeks ago that described the pandemic as a portal, and that it's a chance to kind of break with the past and imagine the world anew. And there were, I guess the thought that we can either walk through that portal sort of dragging our dead ideas and dead rivers, or we can walk through it lightly with little luggage. And ultimately, if that happens, that's going to be down to what choices people make about where to go and eat out and what to order. The government can probably only be responsible for part of that. But it just feels like such a key moment where people are, doubling down on certain parts of their business. They'll either be making yes/no decisions on property, yes/no decisions on staff, menu, offer, supply chain. We want to try and be as kind of loud and influential about what we think those decisions should be.
Yeah, I think that it's without a doubt, feels like a really interesting opportunity. And I think as restaurateurs, maybe we've been, like, I suppose as the industry, I guess, has maybe had this sort of race to mediocrity a little bit in the fact that margins have been so tight for the last few years. And it's now well publicized about just how little the restaurant industry was making and how quickly things went pear-shaped as soon as our revenue dropped to zero. So there is a need to come out of this, even just with simpler menus, certainly to start with, because we can't have the same number of chefs in the kitchen. And if we're having simpler menus, then what we focus on, and hopefully this sort of groundswell of support for community, certainly. And I've said it before on this podcast, but my local high street, I've never seen the greengrocers and the butchers and the bakery as busy as they are because people can't get into the shops. And if the restaurants can do the same, and I've got suppliers who I owe thousands of pounds to, who I've worked with for 15 years and have never owed a penny to in the past, who are being so supportive and really want to kind of help and try and get us restarted without sort of payback of all of that cash instantaneously. And it reminds you of that sense of community and always working with people, not brands. So it does feel like an exciting time. But certainly the smaller menu, creates an opportunity to buy more directly, maybe from the farmers, I guess.
I think in a way, independents out of London are weird, despite enormous challenges and perhaps more keenly felt cash flow challenges than some of the bigger boys. Are arguably in the best position in the whole industry at the moment. But like those that are genuinely loved in their community, we think those businesses have probably got the kind of best opportunity to explore other revenue streams. Fundamentally, if they're asking themselves, not from a paradigm of this is all going to go back to normal in a few weeks and we just need to hold on with government support until it does, but thinking more fundamentally about 18 to 24 months of, period of suppressed trade on the old business model. But asking the question, like, who are the customers that are willing and able to buy from us for the next 18 months? And what can we sell them that they want and that's economically and practically viable, that will kind of survive the disruption of a few phases of more and less intense lockdowns. I think that's the kind of planning that we think that businesses should do. And we know that's sort of overwhelmingly complicated and that, in times of stress, there's quite a lot of background noise and dissonance. But if nothing else, that's something that we want to help try and do with operators that are keen and sort of work through that together.
Yeah, I think it'd be great. I think the biggest challenge probably across the industry is rent, really, isn't it? It's the difficulty, the complexity of the fact that all the rents were negotiated in a time of, peak occupancy and high turnover, albeit with small margin, and coming out the other side, it's just completely different. And the scary thing is that even, those local community, well-supported places out of town, unless the landlords recognise that if we're taking less money, then the rentals just cannot be worth the same, then so much of the industry is just going to disappear, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we have been engaging with landlords on exactly that, trying to do our bit. I think, we don't want to be kind of playing in the margins whilst ignoring the big central problem. I think what we know is that for a lot of our members, rent has crept sort of insidiously over 20% of turnover. And when you've got kind of service charges and business rates, which are also a derivative of the rental value as well, up to a quarter of turnover going that way. And I just think fundamentally, if you're sitting down to a plate of dinner, you don't want a quarter of that money going to rent. I think it's clear that was already unsustainable long before Corona times. I guess the real question is then, well, what are we asking? What's the solution? What do we want landlords to do about it? I think we have been working with Jonathan Downey in the kind of National Timeout campaign and taking that to landlords and trying to get feedback. I guess, long story short, it's an incredibly difficult thing for landlords to vote for. But on the flip side, in a way, landlords are kind of the only people in this whole value chain whose timescales match the kind of true kind of timescales that are in play. They're thinking about kind of long-term placemaking, estate value, etc. So we're cautiously optimistic that we might be able to get a good bit of progress there. I think what we see is happening is quite a lot of kind of one-to-one negotiation, and sometimes involving accountants, sometimes not. Often within an NDA wrap around it, that people can't sort of talk about what they've been offered. And we think that there needs to be a bit of a sort of blast of fresh air in there and a bit of transparency. And it may well be that government intervenes if there's not. I think that, simply trying to move towards a kind of temporary turnover-based rent calculation strikes me as quite sensible, but I'm not a commercial property expert. I think ultimately the existing model was based on assumptions of turnover, which are now incorrect, and replacing those with more accurate assumptions seems to me to be the fairest way of sharing risk. I think, and maybe we should get a landlord on a future one of these. I think one of the real key challenges for landlords to offer the kind of level of reduction that is necessary is if you own a building in Soho and you rent it out to a restaurant for £400,000 a year, that building's probably worth £8 million. If you only get 100 grand for it, that building's probably worth £1.5 million. And just the sort of relationship of the kind of asset value to the rental means that it's super difficult for landlords to kind of, I guess, go far enough to match the kind of reduction in turnover. But, I guess that's where government intervention might be necessary.
Yeah, and I think it's a time period, isn't it? I think the sad reality is that we don't really have a lot of choice. So the sort of the situation at the moment feels like as a tenant, as a lessee of a property, we're sort of taking all of the risk, I suppose, in the fact that 100% drop in revenue at the restaurant side, where landlords are still demanding 100% of the rent, feels like it's just impossible. But as an asset holder, the opportunity to leverage long-term finance on an asset, at least they have that opportunity. Yep. Whereas an operator in a leasehold property, we have no opportunity to raise funds. Our balance sheets have been completely decimated by this. We're all hemorrhaging cash on a day-to-day basis. So basically, the option is we all go under and all of those properties are empty, or we join forces, the government, the landlords, and the operators, and we say, look, this isn't a forever solution, but yeah, the national timeout is sort of 9 months, isn't it? 9 months rent free, and then there's a chance we'll get back to normal. But without that, you're going to completely decimate those values, sort of with a much longer term impact. But I do think it's going to need, as JD says, it's not about government support financially, but it is about coming up with the mechanism, I suppose, that enables those landlords not to have to pay their finance for 9 months.
Exactly.
And this potential,
I couldn't agree more. I guess it's that mechanism which then feels like what we really should be trying to work out, and I guess that's sort of well beyond my pay grade. There's another mechanism I'm quite interested in. That's like, how do we effectively allow restaurants that have got no cash when they reopen to buy from suppliers that are small and sustainable, that need pro forma or payment on delivery? And I think actually it could be a really great opportunity for restaurants to kind of switch up the supply chain to more local, more sustainable, if we could find a mechanism that at scale those suppliers could get paid on order, but then the restaurants had 90, 120-day payment terms. So you'd only probably need one big bank to sort of step in on that. And you create a phenomenal impact in the supply chain of our industry. So, I guess anyone with any kind of ideas or contacts for us about people in financial services that would be interested in that conversation, I'd really welcome a follow-up chat with.
That's a really good idea. Yeah, if JD can get the national timeout nailed, and he's certainly got some momentum behind it. I love that idea. Yeah, if you could do something similar with the smaller suppliers, and Henry Dimbleby's been off, hasn't he, looking at the sort of state of food and supply and farming in the UK. So I don't know. Have you spoken to him about that?
Yeah. So I guess we're about to launch the kind of draft of the National Food Strategy. And obviously Henry's kind of well connected within DEFRA and a lot of the work that's been going on the kind of environmental land management trials. I think I've not spoken to Henry in the last couple of weeks. What my sense is that a lot of that work has kind of paused as people are now kind of looking at more urgent, immediate things. But I think there's a good deal of potential there with that DEFRA work. So ultimately, what they're trying to do is work out what do we replace the Common Agricultural Policy with in terms of farm payments, and how might we measure the public good at farm level. So trying to kind of lean in and influence that for anyone that cares about, biodiversity, the countryside and the UK agricultural system. I think that's the one to get it right at that level. Because if we get it right there, then various points along the chain, be that a kind of meal out in a restaurant or a supermarket shopping basket, will give you that opportunity to kind of understand the, I guess, level to which your purchasing aligns with regenerative agriculture. I guess none of that's going to be ready quick enough to be the basis for subsidy and payments to restaurants in the next year or two. But we think that's the kind of landscape that is going that way, and that ultimately in a couple of years' time, it's going to be a lot easier for people to know what your supply chain is and what kind of agricultural system you're supporting. And we should try and use this sort of glimmer of opportunity we've got now to kind of reset some of the things that we're doing in the business.
Is that what you meant? So you talked earlier about the sort of three stages, I suppose, the managerial support, the entrepreneurship, and then the long term, you mentioned food citizens. What do you mean by that term, food citizens?
Well, like most of the stuff I say, I've stolen it from someone else. I think the Food Ethics Council launched a kind of report a couple of years ago that talks about food citizenship. So I guess the idea, and maybe just Google food citizenship if you're interested, and you'll get a much more eloquent definition than me recalling what I read a couple of years ago, is that the market is a bit screwed in terms of a transaction on some food, in that people make decisions when they're hungry that are largely about sort of speed, convenience, salt, fat, sugar. But equally, people are stakeholders in lots of the externalities of that food system, be it the kind of relationship it has to the kind of countryside and nature, or their own diet and health, or I guess the sort of level of NHS spend on type 2 diabetes and how that kind of feeds into the tax they pay in their salary. So that there's a much more complex web of connections that people are connected to food beyond that sort of narrow purchase, so that the market doesn't work in a conventional sense around people making optimized choices. So food citizenship is, I guess, a kind of rallying cry for people in the food system to try to create less negative externalities in as much as they can. So for restaurants, that's really about the food that it buys, the supply chain, the menu, and the customer messaging. And those three tools are probably the best way to try to appeal to people that are, I guess, trying to make more holistically good food choices.
Okay, yeah, perfect. Thank you. Good answer. Getting back into the practicalities then a little bit, I guess, for people listening, you've come up with some sort of practical suggestions. I know on your website you've got a sort of special page sort of dedicated to coronavirus, and it's split into various sections. But as we look at how we come out of this, and there's been a lot of coverage in the press in the last 10 days around physical distancing in restaurants and what that would look like, and how potentially you end up with maybe 60% less covers. And then we're looking at things like sneeze screens on bars and whether people can wear masks. And for me, the idea of hospitality where people's faces are covered and you can't see the sort of smiles and the kind of the warmth of that you get in restaurants. Have you got any thoughts, or have you been given any advice, I suppose, on what restaurateurs should be doing to be able to open, maybe not in the normal, maybe like you say in 18 months or 2 years time, but over the next 2 or 3 months? Have you seen any good examples? Have you got any advice on the practicalities of what people are going to be able to do or need to do to open their restaurant doors?
Yeah, so I guess from a very practical point of view, there's some advice on our website that we have kind of lifted from an organisation in the States called Oyster Sundays, with their blessing, which is a kind of critical path to reopening safely. and it sort of runs through, I guess, physical interventions like barriers and screens, and standard operating procedures. So, like, I guess, how you run front and back of house environments. So, there's a ton of information out there that I think that Oyster Sundays stuff is a really good synthesis of. It's all in the Creative Commons, and you can kind of download all the way through to kind of, here's something to put in your staff's hand, and they can read. So that's a really good tool. I think, I guess, more conceptually, we don't really know, like so many other people, quite what to do about this. I think what we do know from the work we've been doing with members is that the idea of reopening with no less than 2 meters around all staff and customers is kind of like the emperor's new clothes. It's just not possible. And lots of people are saying it's possible because they need the money. But fundamentally, it's going to be it's a sort of death knell for the majority of the sector, and it's so extreme that people don't want to talk about that. So I guess it's also pretty difficult to kind of weigh in on this and say, government, we don't think that you should enforce 2 meter physical distancing in restaurants, because we're then sort of to some extent gambling with public safety for the sake of, I guess, a memory of what our businesses were like. So I think what's likely to happen is that the government will allow F&B sort of restaurants, hospitality sector, to reopen with a slightly amended protocol that listens to some of that reality. And as long as there's the right level of, I guess, safe operating procedure around hygiene, and that there's some reduction in covers, then that's going to be allowed. That, the sort of the fact that 2 meter physical distancing is impossible in most hospitality contexts will kind of be overlooked. But and in a way, that's good news in the short term, because it will mean that you can generate more revenue from your premises, and some of that rent can get paid off. I think it's almost inevitable that then becomes a place in which coronavirus spreads, and there'll be a sort of slightly on-off period of less and more restrictive lockdowns.
Yeah, it feels like we've seen traffic taken off the streets, and we've seen joggers out, and we've seen cyclists out. I wonder how many restaurants, if you could reclaim some of the roads, how many restaurants could flip to sort of more terraces and more outside space. Certainly in Europe, they even in the colder climes, I'm thinking of places like Amsterdam and Venice, where in the winter they still manage to keep that al fresco dining. I wonder if there'll be a switch for a desire to outside, and whether we might need the local authorities to be a little bit more flexible on issuing licenses for sort of street side dining.
I think that's a great idea, and we think that will happen. Just like there was a sort of relaxation on the regulations and planning around being a takeaway, I think a sort of level of relaxation around use of outdoor dining and outdoor space would be a really smart way of kind of, I guess, striking that inevitable difficult balance between kind of perceived safety and business need.
Certainly, selfishly, as a restaurateur with a restaurant on the beach, we've been looking at the opportunity to almost go, at sort of 50%, 60% less capacity internally, we're looking at a model where we just flip the whole restaurant into a takeaway only option, basically, and almost like a festival style, sort of outside the restaurant, having 4 or 5 queues. And we've been looking at some technology, I guess, similar to Argos, where people can potentially order on their phones and then be given a collection point and a collection time, and say, right, at 17:30 at collection point 3, your food is ready. And then you can take it out onto the beach, and we've got miles of space outside. So it would be nice if the council. Yeah, it'd be nice if they recognised, I guess, this sort of, you can't have a one-size-fits-all and say, look, restaurants can't open till August, and that, whether it fits under the takeaway or whether we say external terraces, as long as sort of tables are a certain distance apart. But it's just making sure, I guess, that, there's always a temptation to have a one-size-fits-all, but there are some nuances and getting that flexibility. But we've got a meeting with our MP Thursday, I think, to chat about some of those specifics, I guess.
I guess the one good thing about physical distancing is that it's really clear. And I think one of the challenges is going to be, how does the government or local authorities allow something more flexible that then doesn't become a race to the bottom? I think there will be certain formats and models that can cope with this a bit easier. I'm sure there will be plenty of people listening wishing they had a beach outside the restaurant.
They can buy my restaurant pretty cheap at the moment, Andrew.
I guess there's a. I don't want to sound too negative, but I think if there's ambiguity, then it will quickly become a race to the bottom, where people sort of feel like I think certain people have been in the press talking about wanting to get back up to about 70% covers and things like that. It's going to be very difficult for people to kind of self-impose restrictions if it doesn't feel like everyone's playing by the same rules.
Yeah. No, it's true. Yeah, I sympathise for the government. It's a complex issue. So, okay. Well, is there anything else that we've not covered, Andrew? Conscious of time, anything in particular that the SRA are doing that people should go and check out, or any other thoughts that you'd like to share?
I think please do check out kind of the SRA.org and our coronavirus support materials. They're a kind of rolling mix of things that are managerial and immediate, and some things that are a bit longer term. Please feel free to join our WhatsApp group, where we'll be kind of posting breaking news as we see it. That will give you a kind of heads up earlier than you might otherwise get it. I think whilst it feels a little bit negative, sort of date stamped as we are in early May, I think my advice to particularly independent people in hospitality is that just really try and think about which customers are willing and able to buy from you for the next 18 months and what you can sell them. And just try and be really focused and allow yourself the headspace to be creative on that. And then once you've been creative on that, use a basic planning tool like a spreadsheet that we've got on our website you can access for free to look at whether that is going to be a viable business model and what kind of volume you can do. I think that's the sort of planning that we'd really encourage right now.
Okay. And the Oyster Sunday stuff you mentioned, did you say the links are on your website to that as well?
All there. So that's
okay.
Kind of reopening critical path. So it's the sort of dizzying number of things you need to think about before reopening your business.
Perfect. Okay, well, I'll put some links up there. I know the link to the WhatsApp group is on your website as well, isn't it? So I'll put some links on that on the show notes to this as well. Okay. Well, look, thank you for what you're doing and, representing us and, being able to continue. And I love some of the ideas around, what the future could like. And if we can grab that opportunity, it would be really exciting. And thanks for sparing the time today, Andrew. Really good to catch up with you.
All right. All the best.
Thank you. Thanks so much for joining me. Really hope you enjoyed that conversation and a slightly different stance other than an operator and the struggles that we face, but more looking to what the future could look like. Clearly our survival at all is the current focus, but if there is an opportunity to change some of the things we did not like about our business models or the industry model before, let's try and incorporate a better world into our survival strategies. I will pop the links Andrew and I discussed to the Oyster Sunday advice and the general SRA support and the WhatsApp group to join the conversation onto the Humans of Hospitality website. Just head to humansofhospitality.co.uk and click on the episode tab or type Andrew into the search bar. And whilst you're there, please do sign up to the newsletter for a weekly email from me and click on the Patreon link to become a supporter by popping a few quid in the tip jar. A cheeky review on Apple Podcasts also only takes a few seconds and really helps me out. Thanks again, and I will catch up with you very soon for a new episode. And whilst I used to release these every Monday morning, I've been a little bit more flexible recently in trying to turn interviews around in just 48 hours or sometimes even same day, where chats are particularly time critical in the current fast-paced period of changing advice. I hope that's working okay for you, and I do have some episodes ready to release that were recorded pre-lockdown and hope to start getting those out to you soon for a little smidgen of normality. Okay, cheers for now.